Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof now for the 19th of March 2024. I know there's a lot of content today. There's been Ramstein and lots going on, so sorry not sorry. We're going to start with growing tensions in the Balkans. So the Balkans is in that southeastern area of Europe where you've got Serbia, Montenegro, Albania, Croatia, so on and so forth. Putin wants war in the Balkans, says Ivana Strada, who's a bit of an expert. I do want to interview her, and I have reached out to her, but it's, when you can't privately message people that you're not like friends with on Twitter, you can't do it unless you've got blue ticks, basically. And so I occasionally put things on her Twitter threads, but if anyone knows her better than I do, can contact her for an interview. That'd be fab. Anyway, she's an expert in this area. She says Russia is exploiting ethnic tensions as Serbia threatens violence against Kosovo and secessionists threaten a Bosnian collapse. So she's written an article in Wall Street Journal, which I think I might look at for an extra if I have time. And indeed, I think the Russians have reacted quite badly to the article she's written. So it's found its mark. But yeah, the fallout from the West failing to sufficiently support Ukraine continues. So the West not being strong enough initially with Ukraine has meant that actually Russia feel that they can foment more discord around Ukraine, and the leaders around Ukraine who are in the sphere of influence of Russia can continue to be, pro-Putin. 24 hours after signing a security agreement with who? Russia. Serbia's Vucic announces they will invade Kosovo at a time of their choosing.
Pa nije problem. Hoćete njih?
Yeah, unfortunately, I can't speak his language, so we'll have to take that for granted. Right, Charles Michel, Europe must prepare for war. If Europe wants to exist in peace, it must shift to a war economy mode and significantly bolster defence capabilities in the face of the threat passed by Russia, European Council President Charles Michel said yesterday. It is all going a bit south, isn't it, really? France has joined Warsaw's demands to extend restrictions on imports of agricultural products from Ukraine, Politico has quoted sources as saying. So the French President Macron, who's hitherto been really strong on support for Ukraine, and now appears to be positioning himself in support of restrictions on Ukrainian agricultural products. Hold your horses, we'll talk about this in a second. He and Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, have reached an agreement on the issue during a recent meeting in Berlin. This jeopardizes negotiations on extending Ukraine's ability to trade freely with the EU and could deprive the country of 1.2 billion euros in revenue. Now, two things to say about this. First of all, the European Union plans to impose duties on grain imports from Russia and Belarus, of which France is a major member here. According to Financial Times, citing sources, in the coming days, the European Commission is going to impose a duty of 95 euros per tonne of grain imports from Russia and Belarus. According to the sources of the newspaper, the introduction of the duty will lead to an increase in prices for cereals from these two countries at least twice. The interlocutors also noted that the EU plans to impose a duty of 50% of the cost of oilseeds and oilseed products. These duties will be the first restriction imposed by the EU on food products after the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. Okay, so I think you need to take what Macron is asking for here in the context of two things. One, the EU just about to put restrictions on Russian and Belarusian grain coming in to Europe. Many have been complaining that Poland's been restricting stuff coming across the border from Ukraine, but not restricting stuff coming across the border from Russia. Now, of course, that's partly because Ukraine has got this reduced tariff scenario as if they were part of the EU. And that has meant that they've been taking stuff, and hauliers involved here as well, but a lot of agricultural product has come through into the EU from Ukraine, and therefore is undercutting the market price of what Europeans like Polish farmers can produce their stuff for. So that's why they've been getting annoyed. They want the EU tariff border, if you like, to go up between Ukraine and EU. Now, if France is saying, right, you're going to not be able to import Ukrainian agricultural product at tariffless, into the EU without tariff, then that's a problem for our French farmers. So what we're going to do is we're going to put. This is how I'd understand it. So please correct me. I'm probably very wrong. We're going to put. We want the tariffs to go back up to. We're going to stop products coming in from Ukraine to force the EU to put tariffs back on Ukrainian grain, for example. And at the same time, so that would put it on a level playing field with Russian and Belarusian grain, but at the same time, put extra tariffs on Russian and Belarusian grain and agricultural product. In other words, we'll protect European farmers. You will have frictionless trade. We'll be able to buy all the stuff we want to. Then the next step is going to Ukraine. It will be slightly more expensive because they've got EU tariffs. And then higher tariffs for Russian stuff. In other words, the market will favour Ukraine over Russia. And that will hopefully bridge a bit of a gap there. So now the second contextual bit of context that we need to understand is that France, even though apparently Macron, so he's not super popular as a French president, and he's not particularly popular with the farmers, even though apparently he's done some good things for the farmers, like more so than the farmers are always complaining in France, right? But they're particularly up in arms at the moment, loads of protests, and that's on the back of Macron doing some pretty good things for them. Anyway, you need to understand what Macron is trying to do with Ukraine agri-produce by understanding what's going on in France with the farmers, and that's similar with Poland and the farmers as well, although probably for different reasons. The Polish farmers and hauliers are more worried about Ukrainian stuff directly, as well as internal EU stuff, which is probably more what the French farmers are worried about, rather than prima facie the Ukrainian stuff, although they'll probably jump onto that too. Anyway, it's all quite complicated, and that's why I think you've got Macron coming out and saying what he's saying, in line with Donald Tusk, who's having the same problems. Right. Going on to American topics now. This is just breaking at the moment. President Biden announces that an agreement with congressional leadership has been reached to pass the 6 remaining financial year 2024 annual appropriations bills, including defense. In other words, there's not going to be a government shutdown. It's all sorted out. Now, what that means is very good news, because lots of people are saying that the supplemental bill for Ukraine will be sorted out after all the government stuff has been sorted out. So the fact that the administration should come to an agreement with the congressional leaders on a path forward for those remaining 4-year funding bills, and they'll be brought to floor, and he will then sign them immediately. That means that we're looking good for Ukraine aid, well, looking better than we previously were. Randy Mott here, who's a Republican, who's also very pro-Ukrainian, says the loan idea, so Senator Lindsey Graham was talking about this, Donald Trump has even posited this idea. The loan idea is being worked on by a group of senators and House members. It will likely be the vehicle to get Ukraine aid passed. One upside of this is that it will include a much better and more US equipment choices for Ukraine. We could see F-16s, hundreds more Bradleys, and even M1 tanks. The ammo is still an issue, but it could be immediately improved by another 500,000 155mm cluster rounds, which the US says it will never use. And so, yeah, interesting ideas coming out there, that you could see something of an improvement if a loan-based mechanism was employed. Right, this is where we get onto Ranty McRantpants. I'll try and keep myself in check. So, it turns out that one of the people running for president in November 2024, Donald Trump, is entertaining the idea of getting Paul Manafort back on board to be involved in the campaign for Trump to be US president. Right. If you were wondering what Trump thinks about Russia and thinks about Ukraine before, and you were worried before, be even more worried now. So Paul Manafort made millions consulting pro-Kremlin Viktor Yanukovych, together with Roger Stone, who's also in Trump's team. He's consulted several other authoritarian leaders and dictators around the world too. He, of course, and Stone was pardoned by Trump in 2020. So this is the news that Trump is eyeing Paul Manafort for the 2024 campaign role. Former campaign manager was pardoned by Trump for bank and tax fraud and a lot of convictions and accusations he hid millions he made consulting for pro-Russian Ukrainian politicians. So a little bit more about him.
But it's worth remembering that Donald Trump is praising somebody who
Paul Manafort
went to trial, as is his right. Paul Manafort was convicted by a jury of his peers of 8 felonies, sort of widespread tax and bank fraud. He then pled guilty to more tax, more bank fraud, obstruction of justice.
So he's not innocent. He's done those things. He pled guilty and he was pardoned.
Admitted that he tampered with 2 witnesses while out on bail. That led to the judge revoking his being out on bail and sending him to jail. He also, as you noted, had ordered that internal polling data be given to his colleague Konstantin Kilimnik, who was found by the FBI to be closely associated with Russian intelligence. And actually, after the Biden administration took over, it was confirmed and reported that Russian polling data went to Russia, didn't just go to his associate, that it actually did make its way all the way to the Kremlin.
So Paul Manafort supplied US data to the Kremlin, effectively. I mean, he's a Kremlin agent.
So this is somebody who has a history, a litany of felonies that are quite serious, that usually is not something that is on the resume of somebody who is a campaign manager of one of the 2 major parties in the United States.
And it's actually worse than that. So if you go and look, first of all, go and watch Active Measures on Amazon Prime, because it's effectively all about him. There's a documentary on his connections to of the US government, Trump's campaign to Russia. You can read his Wikipedia page. I mean, I don't have time to go through this, but my goodness, his connection to Russia is vast. Goodness me, so much to talk about there. What can I say? He's indebted to a chap. There's a chap called Deripaska, and also Kilimnik, I think is how you pronounce his name, who are these sort of big Russian people. And he's been investigated subsequently. Obviously, he's been pardoned, but the United States Senate Select Committee on Intelligence conducted in its August 2020 final report that as Trump campaign manager, quote, Manafort worked with Kilimnik starting in 2016 on narratives that sought to undermine evidence that Russia interfered with the 2016 US election and to direct such suspicions towards Ukraine. And this is where the whole idea that it was not Russia that was interfering, it was Ukraine with the US presidential elections. The report characterized Kilimnik as a Russian intelligence officer and said Manafort's activities represented, quote, a grave counterintelligence threat. The investigation found Manafort's presence on the campaign and proximity to Trump created opportunities for the Russian intelligence services to exert influence over and acquire confidential information on the Trump campaign. The committee assesses that Kilimnik likely served as a channel for Manafort for Russian intelligence services, and that those services likely sought to exploit Manafort's access to gain insight into the campaign. On numerous occasions over the course of the time of the Trump campaign, Manafort sought to secretly share internal campaign information with Kilimnik. Manafort briefed Kilimnik on sensitive campaign polling data and the campaign's strategy for beating Hillary Clinton. In April 2021, a document released to the US Treasury Department announcing new sanctions against Russia confirmed a direct pipeline from Manafort to Russian intelligence, noting during the 2016 US presidential election campaign, Kilimnik provided Russian intelligence services with sensitive information on polling and campaign strategy. The 5th and final volume of the August 20th Senate Intelligence Committee report, in a section on Manafort, noted, quote, Manafort had direct access to Trump, as well as the Trump campaign's senior official strategies and information, and Manafort, often with the assistance of Gates, engaged with individuals inside Russia and Ukraine on matters pertaining both to his personal business prospects and the 2016 US election. The report found that in the beginning, around 2004, Manafort began to work for Deripaska and pro-Russian oligarchs in Ukraine, and that this involvement led to Manafort's involvement in the victory of Yanukovych. So he's a pro-Russian Yanukovych who was then ousted in the 2014 Euromaidan. So that's who Manafort's involved with in the 2010 Ukrainian election. So that he was taken from those elections and then see, oh, well done, you did a good job there, getting that Russian guy elected. We're going to use you in a Trump campaign. The committee report stated the Russian government coordinates with and directs Deripaska as part of the influence operations that Manafort assisted with, and that Manafort's influence work for Deripaska was in effect influence work for the Russian government and its interests. That's who Manafort is. Freaking hell. Like, now, with the Ukraine war going on, now, with all the claims that you know, you're in love with Putin, you love dictators, he goes, I know what I'm going to do now to dispel those myths. I know what I'm going to do to make it very clear whose side I'm on in the Ukraine-Russia war. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to re-employ Paul Manafort that got us into this mess in the first place, and who's deeply involved with sending state secrets to Russia through intermediaries, and has been found guilty of that, and then I pardoned him. That's who I want to employ. That's who. Can you go out and get me some Paul Manafort? That's who's going to be really useful for this campaign. Let's double down. Let's go deep in this. Hey, you think I'm pro-Russia? Yeah, I am, because I'm going to get Paul Manafort to run my campaign or involved in my campaign or whatever. Jeepers creepers. Like, I know you might think I'm like prima facie just anti-Trump, but if you care at all about Ukraine and you see what the frick that man is doing, the decisions he's making and the things he's saying, what he said about the hot mic incident for Kim Jong-un the other day, like the stuff he's saying, honestly, I just don't get that people are still coming at me defending Trump with relation to Russia and Ukraine. I just don't get it. Anyway, as you already know, Senator Lindsey Graham's out in Kiev, annoying them by the sounds of it, by lecturing them on mobilization. But he has addressed President Biden with a proposal to recognize Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism, and I fully agree with that. Now, talking about the US in terms of Russia, Russians are still enjoying American burgers and sandwiches at companies as companies refuse to leave. So there's a number of companies, a small cohort of 6 American fast food chains have decided not to pull out. So lots of them did. McDonald's, Domino's, Starbucks, KFC, Pizza Hut, Hard Rock Cafe, Jamie Oliver, all left Russia. But Carl's Jr.'s, Papa John's, Costa Coffee, Burger King and TGI Fridays have continued to operate business as usual. So those, I thought Costa Coffee was originally owned by Whitbread in the UK. It's probably a long time since that was the case. Anyway, if you want to go out and, or on Twitter, give these guys a bit of a hassle for their support of the Russian war effort, then please feel free. Okay, vote with your feet. Right. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi he's a nationalist Prime Minister of India. That's where he sits kind of politically. He's congratulated Russian President Vladimir Putin on his re-election in March 18th, becoming, it wasn't an election of course, becoming one of the few democratically elected leaders to do so. Now, talking about India, it's a very important state for Ukraine to try and get on side. Kuleba is expected to visit, so he's Dmitry Kuleba, the foreign minister for Ukraine, is expected to visit India later in March. Ukraine's foreign minister is expected to go there, according to the Hindu newspaper, citing undisclosed diplomatic source. And that would be, I think, very useful, wise for the Ukrainians to try and cozy up to India and try and, bring them over to the Ukrainian side rather than seeing them try and, I guess, through BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, cozy up themselves to Russia. Now, Jakub Yanowski here saying, what is going on? In my opinion, people like this who want to fight a holy sacred war against the West while living in the West should be deported to Russia. So he's talking about this very pro-Russian priest, Father Nikita Chemadokov, the highest-ranked Russian Orthodox priest in New South Wales, so that's in Australia, votes for Putin at the Russian consulate in Sydney and declares that Russia is fighting a holy, sacred war against the West. A total disgrace to Jesus Christ in the Orthodox faith, says Drew Pavlou. Now, him and a bunch of Z-wearing, Wagner t-shirt-wearing Russians in Australia who have voted, I don't know, I find this really, really annoying. Anyway, I guess they're free to do that, but, that is freedom. However, you're biting the hand that feeds you, really. And talking of Australia, there's a bit of controversy because ABC, the Australian Broadcasting Commission, has been reprimanded by the Ukrainian ambassador for a documentary they aired on Four Corners, repeating Kremlin's blatant lies. The national broadcaster ABC has defended the important contribution to war reporting that documentary represents. It's not gone down well with many people. I want my Australian viewers to let me know some deets on this, what you think about this. I haven't watched it, but The Guardian reporting the ABC has defended an international documentary about the Russia-Ukraine war screened on Four Corners after it was criticised as propaganda. On Monday, it broadcast The Other Side from British filmmaker Sean Langan, which promised to offer a human perspective on life on the Russian front line. But the ambassador said the documentary repeated blatant lies that emanated from the Kremlin and served the interests of Russian leader Vladimir Putin, and alleged the program was a journalistic equivalent of a bowl of vomit. Wow. It also minimized and denigrated the deaths of thousands of innocent Ukrainian men, women and children who have been killed by Russian soldiers in illegal and brutal invasion, strongly condemned by Australia and a majority of countries through the UNGA resolution in March 2022. The Australian Broadcasting Corporation should be ashamed that it put the total garbage to air. The ABC said the documentary, which remains available on ABC iView, is considered an important contribution to reporting the war. And I guess if you're giving the opinions of Russian soldiers fighting a platform that is ostensibly unchallenged, then that is the same as giving them Russia free propaganda, right? I presume. Although I guess you could say that the opposite way for the Ukrainians, but it's not the Ukrainians who have been invading another sovereign territory and committing hundreds of thousands of war crimes. So, you can't do that both sides so easily there. As SK Media here say, idiots think our mainstream media is pro-Ukrainian, but let's face it, they just rushed to Ukraine initially because access was easier. It was a historical breaking situation and Zelensky had top-notch sound bites, but they quickly defaulted back to pro-Russian narratives. And he's talking about, quoting or showing an excerpt of that documentary, which has interestingly been given community notes on Twitter. In other words, they're fact-checking the documentary. Russians are not defending their country. They're attacking neighbouring Ukraine's lands, its soldiers and families. So the idea that they're defending their countries is unchallenged. They're not defending. They've invaded another country. The Autonomous Republic of Crimea, Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast are all internationally recognised parts of Ukraine under illegal Russian occupation. And if the documentary didn't clearly say that, then they are remiss and they are doing Russian propaganda. As Pekka Kalyanemi says, this has already been shared by many, and here's my vulgar 2 cents, and I like this, simple to the point. What the F were they thinking? The ABC. What the F were they thinking? Anyway, Aussies, let me know. Right, Estonia has announced the expulsion of a Russian diplomat. The country's foreign ministry called on Moscow to stop hybrid operations against Estonia's security. The Estonian Foreign Ministry has declared an employee of the Russian embassy in Tallinn persona non grata. The Estonian Foreign Ministry has handed a corresponding note to the Russian ambassador in the country, ERR reports. Russian ministry said it would take retaliatory steps. Of course it would. Now, this is interestingly in light of some electronic warfare it's not in light of, but at the same time, there's all this electronic warfare going on from Kaliningrad around affecting the Baltics and Poland and the Baltic Sea. Indeed, Grant Shapps, the UK Secretary of Defence, was in a plane returning from the east, and they lost GPS and they were jammed by the Russians effectively. So that's going on, and this is breaking news. So in Russia, the trawler Captain Lobanov is on fire and possibly has already sunk. There's an explosion on board by all accounts. Russian authorities in Kaliningrad region say a fire had broken out on board the trawler Captain Lobanov. leaving several people injured. Russian Telegram channel 112, which is close to law enforcement officials, reports that the trawler sank in the Baltic near the town of Pionersky. It is claimed that one person has died and 2 others are missing. Quote, the long-suffering vessel already sank 3 years ago in the settlement of Svetli without casualties then. Today, around 11 a.m, the ship gave a distress signal due to fire on board. Rescuers moved to the site. Of the 7 crew members, 4 were rescued. They were taken ashore and sent to medical facilities. 1 sailor died, 2 more are missing. The search operation continues. I don't know if this is a trawling vessel that has just had 2 very unfortunate incidents, or whether that vessel is involved in subterfuge, electronic warfare, and doing stuff for the Russians. I think probably the latter, but I have not that much to go on for that. It's just that not many trawlers explode in my knowledge of fishing, which is obviously extensive. Yeah, they don't often blow up trawlers, and so if they do blow up, I'm thinking they're probably not trawling. They're probably trolling. Andrei Yermak says, the International Coalition for the Return of the Ukrainian Children, led by Ukraine and Canada, has already united 33 countries. So 33 countries are on board to try and get children back to Russia, back to Ukraine from Russia. It's one of these things that we almost forget about, the fact that there's been all these war crimes involving the filtration of adults and children through and into Russia, many of them without a hope of returning. It's a shocker. And these young children are being brainwashed, and it's pretty disgusting. Xi Jinping will travel to France to convince European countries to invite Russia to the summit in Switzerland, according to Politico. According to newspaper sources, China may refuse to participate in future peace talks on Ukraine if Russia does not take part in them. I don't really know what's going on here, other than, well, I'm guessing China trying to bend Europe's hand to look more towards Russia for a solution to the problem in Ukraine. Russia's got the solution. Pull the frick out of there. Anyway, China's the biggest enabler of Russia's invasion in Ukraine. China just released January and February export data. On the surface, those fell back. Fell back in the early part of... Actually, I don't know from this. It might be from other data, but that's just Chinese New Year seasonality. So I think it might have fallen in around Chinese New Year, only to jump back up. Compare January and February, going back in time, and 2024 is an all-time high. So in other words, don't be sold by a little bit of seasonality. China is definitely supporting Russia in the war through economic assistance and trade. Anyway, that's enough from me. Hopefully that was of use and interesting. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. And Norwich22, please reach out. Please don't go. Please don't go. Don't make me sing. Anyway, take care everyone. Speak soon.